Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving into a case that truly changed the conversation in India about the right to die, the incredible story of Aruna Shanbaug versus the Union of India. For nearly 4 decades, there was a black hole in the law when it came to her situation. Then, her case landed in front of the Supreme Court, forcing them to draw a line in the sand. We're talking about the landmark 2011 judgment that created the very first legal framework for passive euthanasia in India. For any law student, this case is an absolute must-know. Okay, so before we get into all the legal nitty-gritty, you really have to understand the human story behind it all. The facts of this case are just heart-wrenching, and they're what set this whole legal battle in motion. So let's go back to November 27, 1973. Aruna Shanbaug, a young nurse, was brutally assaulted by a hospital janitor. He choked her with a dog chain, cutting off oxygen to her brain and leaving her in what's known as a persistent vegetative state. And she would remain in that state for 37 years, cared for day in and day out by the incredible nurses of King Edward Memorial Hospital. Now, from a legal perspective, this next part is pretty wild. Her attacker, Sohanlal Valmiki, was caught. But here's the thing, he was convicted of attempted murder and robbery, but, and this is a huge but, not rape. Why? Well, 2 big reasons. First, back then, the legal definition of rape in the Indian Penal Code didn't cover sodomy. Second, and this is quite shocking, it's reported the hospital dean actually left out details of the assault to avoid a public scandal for her fiancé. So Valmiki served his sentence and just walked free. All right, fast forward 36 years. The story takes a dramatic turn and lands right in the lap of the legal system. And this is where it starts to raise these massive questions about one of the most fundamental rights we have, the right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution. In 2009, a journalist and activist named Pinky Virani files a petition with the Supreme Court. Her argument was simple but profound. She wanted to end Aruna's suffering. The legal tool she proposed, passive euthanasia. Essentially, the plea was to let Aruna have a dignified death by stopping the medical support that was keeping her body alive. Now, it's really important we get this distinction right because it's at the heart of the case. Passive euthanasia isn't about doing something to end a life, like giving a lethal injection. It's about not doing something. It's the withdrawal of medical treatment or life support. So think of it as an omission rather than a commission. And that was exactly what the petition was asking for. So this set the stage for a major conflict. The court found itself looking at 2 completely different perspectives, and both sides were adamant that they were acting in Aruna's best interest. On one hand, you had Pinky Virani. She argued that Aruna's life had become nothing but suffering, that she had lost all human dignity, and that the right to life under Article 21 has to include the right to a dignified death. But then, on the other hand, you had the Chem hospital staff. These are the people who had been by her side for decades. They said, no, she responds to us, we have a connection with her, and we want to keep caring for her. And they leaned on a legal precedent, the Gian Core case, which had held that the right to die is not a fundamental right. So this brings up a huge legal question, right? Who actually gets to make this decision for Aruna? This led the court to a really crucial legal hurdle, figuring out who could be considered her next friend. And next friend is a legal term, basically for someone who can step in and represent a person in court when they can't do it themselves, like a child, or in this case, an adult who is incapacitated. So the court had to figure out who really has the right to speak for Aruna. And the court's decision on this was a game changer. They looked at Pinky Virani's petition, and while they acknowledged her good intentions, they said no. She didn't have the legal standing to be the next friend. Instead, they gave that status to the KEM hospital staff. Why? Because of their 37 years of round-the-clock selfless care. The court basically said their actions spoke louder than any words, and that incredible dedication gave them the truest right to speak for Aruna's best interests. Okay, so with the next friend decided, let's dive into the final verdict and see exactly how the bench, led by Justice Markanday Katju, came to its conclusion. A huge piece of this puzzle was a report from a medical panel that the Supreme Court itself had set up, and their findings were crystal clear. First, Aruna was not brain dead. There was still activity in her brain. Second, her body could still digest food on its own. And maybe most importantly, they found 0 signs, no symptoms, no body language, nothing to suggest she wanted to end her life. Their conclusion? Passive euthanasia just wasn't necessary here. This case is also super important because it gave us a key legal definition for what a permanent vegetative state, or PVS, actually is. It drew a clear line between being in a PVS, where you're awake but not aware, and being brain dead. The panel felt Aruna fit most of the PVS criteria, but that key distinction, that she was not brain dead, became a central pillar of the court's final decision. So, on March 7, 2011, the Supreme Court made its decision. Taking into account that medical report and, of course, the strong wishes of the CAM staff, her legally recognized next friend, the court rejected the plea. Aruna's life support would not be withdrawn. And the reaction from the chem nursing staff? Pure celebration. I mean, they were reportedly handing out sweets and even cut a cake. They called it her rebirth. It's just such a powerful image that shows you how deep their connection was, and it really validates the court's decision to call them her true family in this fight. But here's where the story gets even bigger, especially for legal precedent. The court didn't just stop at ruling on Aruna's case. It looked around, saw a void in the law, and decided to fill it. It literally created law. The court called it a legislative vacuum. Basically, Parliament hadn't made any laws about euthanasia, so the court said, we can't just sit here and do nothing. This is a classic example of judicial activism. They went ahead and laid down a clear step-by-step procedure for the entire country to follow until Parliament eventually gets around to passing a law. And these guidelines they created are incredibly thorough. It's a very strict, court-monitored process. You have to file a petition in the High Court. A bench of at least 2 judges has to be formed. They have to appoint their own committee of doctors. They have to notify the family. The bottom line is, the power to make these life or death decisions was handed to the high courts, making them the final say, backed by medical experts and a fair hearing for everyone. But, the law is never static. It's always evolving. And the Shanbaug judgment, as monumental as it was, turned out to be just the beginning, a stepping stone to an even bigger conversation about Article 21. Because just 7 years later, another massive case comes along, Common Cause versus the Union of India. And the Supreme Court takes things even further. They didn't just follow the Shanbaug guidelines, they built on them. They officially declared that the right to die with dignity is a fundamental right under Article 21. And, what's more, the 2018 judgment legalized living wills. This was huge. It means you and I can now create advanced directives about our own future medical care, which is a massive leap forward for personal autonomy. So when you look back, the Aruna Shanbaug case is so much more than just one woman's tragic story. It's this incredible case study in how the law gets made when the lawmakers don't. It really forces us to ask that fundamental question. When Parliament is silent on something as crucial as life and death, what is the proper role of the court? Should it step in? Should it wait? That's a debate that's still shaping India's legal world today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.